Good morning, I'm Mr. Forrester, and this is not World Watch. But that's okay, because if you were here last time, if you were absent yesterday, please tune in to my Chapter 4 reading on this channel. We are now going to read Chapter 5 of The Hiding Place. So as you all probably know by now, Chapter 4 is the last of our flashback chapters. Now it's officially in the present tense of World War II, Holland and Germany. So this is when the story really starts to pick up. All the exposition on the personalities and how faith-based his family is all going to come into play now when they start putting all that faith and belief into practice. So let's see how Corey begins to, in real time, in nonfiction, handle these new situations of World War II and Germany further rising to power across Europe. All right, let's get started. Chapter 5, Invasion. The slender hands of the clock on the stairwell pointed to 9:25 as we left the dining room that night. That in itself was unusual in our orderly lives. Father was 80 years old now, highlight, and promptly at 8:45 each evening, an hour sooner than formerly, he would open the Bible, the signal for prayers, read one chapter, ask God's blessing on us through the night, and by 9:15 be climbing the stairs to his bedroom. Tonight, however, the Prime Minister was to address the nation at 9:30. One question ached through all of Holland like a long-held breath. Would there be war? We circled up the steps to Tante Jans's room, and Father went to warm up the big table radio. We did not so often spend the evening up here listening to music now. England, France, and Germany were at war. Their stations carried mostly war reports or code messages, and many frequencies were jammed. Even Dutch stations carried mostly war news, and that we could hear just as well on the small portable radio we kept now in the dining room, a gift from Pickwick the Christmas before. So yeah, what you'll see now is a lot of information being censored, a lot of radios being confiscated by the Germans, and thankfully they have one tiny little radio they keep secret. So pay attention to that note. This, though, was to be a major broadcast. Somehow we felt it merited the large old set with its elaborate speaker. We sat now, waiting for 9:30, tense and upright in the high-backed wooden chairs, avoiding, as if by a kind of premonition, the cushioned and comfortable seats. So they're at the edge of their seats. Then the Prime Minister's voice was speaking to us, sonorous and soothing. There would be no war. He had had assurances from high sources on both sides. Holland's neutrality would be respected. It would be the Great War all over again. There was nothing to fear. The Dutchmen were urged to remain calm and to... The voice stopped. Betsy and I looked up, as astonished. Father had snapped off the set, and in his blue eyes was a fire we had never seen before. "It is wrong to give people hope when there is no hope," he said. "It is wrong to base faith upon wishes. There will be war. The Germans will attack, and we will fall." Highlight that little paragraph there of dialogue. It's cool how the spirit of discernment is with Casper. How he sees the bluffing, he sees the lying, and he's like, no, this is not right. If we're going to go to war, we're going to go to war, but you need to tell us these things. But Casper is so wise in his godly wisdom that he's just saying, no, I'm not just going to listen to what the government tells me. I'm going to see what the Spirit is urging me to see in this moment. He stamped out his cigar stub in the ashtray beside the radio, and with it, it seemed, the anger too, for his voice grew gentle again. "Oh, my dears, I am sorry for all Dutchmen now who do not know the power of God. For we will be beaten, but he will not." Oh, highlight that especially. That's a really good line of showing how, yes, he has a discernment of what's going on, but he very much still trusts that the Lord will give him peace. He kissed us both good night, and in a moment we heard the steps of an old man climbing the stairs to bed. Betsy and I sat rooted to our chairs. Father so skilled at finding good in every situation, so slow to believe evil. If Father saw war and defeat, then there was no possibility at all. Highlight those last two sentences. Father so skilled at finding good in every situation. Actually, yeah. And then, if Father saw war and defeat, there really was no other possibility. I sat bolt upright in my bed. What was that? There it was again. A brilliant flash followed a second later by an explosion which shook the bed. I scrambled over the covers to the window and leaned out. The patch of sky above the chimney tops glowed orange-red. I felt for my bathrobe and thrust my arms through the sleeves as I whirled down the stairs. At Father's room, I pressed my ear against the door. Between bomb bursts, I heard the regular rhythm of his breathing. I dived down a few more steps and into Tante Jans's room. Betsy had long since moved into Tante Jans's little sleeping cubicle, where she would be near the kitchen and the doorbell. She was sitting up in the bed. I groped toward her in the darkness, and we threw our arms around each other. Together we said it aloud. War. It was 5 hours after the Prime Minister's speech. How long we clung together listening, I do not know. The bombing seemed mostly to be coming from the direction of the airport. At last we tiptoed uncertainly out to Tante Jans's front room. The glowing sky lit the room with a strange brilliance. The chairs, the mahogany bookcase, the old upright piano, all pulsed with an eerie light. I love this imagery, but I hate the context. Betsy and I knelt down by the piano bench. For what seemed hours, we prayed for our country, for the dead and injured tonight, for the Queen. And then, incredibly, Betsy began to pray for the Germans, up there in the plains, caught in the fist of the giant evil loose in Germany. I looked at my sister kneeling beside me in the light of burning Holland. "Oh, Lord," I whispered, "listen to Betsy, not me, because I cannot pray for those men at all." Oh, that's really good. I like that because she's self-aware that she hates what is going on, and she knows that she's going to have no godly love for these men who are bombing the cities. So listen to her prayers instead. That's a really humble thing to say. And it was then that I had the dream. It couldn't have been a real dream because I was not asleep. But a scene was suddenly and unreasonably in my mind. I saw the Grote Market, half a block away, as clearly as though I were standing there. Saw the town hall and St. Bavo's and the fish mart with its stair-stepped facade. Then, as I watched, a kind of odd old farm wagon, old-fashioned and out of place in the middle of a city, came lumbering across the square pulled by 4 enormous black horses. To my surprise, I saw that I myself was sitting in the wagon, and Father too, and some friends. Oh, and Betsy. There were many others. Mr. Forrester is still a little on sleep-in time. There were many others, some strangers and some friends. I recognized Pickwick and Tews, Willem and young Peter. All together we were slowly being drawn across the square beside those horses. We couldn't get off the wagon. That was the terrible thing. It was taking us away, far away, I felt, but we didn't want to go. That whole paragraph is very, very good foreshadowing and just a very good detail to note in this. If you don't want to highlight every single line, I would definitely do a little square bracket across that whole paragraph. You'll definitely want to know that stuff. "Betsy!" I cried, jumping up, pressing my hands to my eyes. "Betsy, I've had such an awful dream." I felt her around my shoulder. "We'll go down to the kitchen where the light won't show, and we'll make a pot of coffee." The booming of the bombs was less frequent and farther away as Betsy put on the water. Closer by was the wail of fire alarms and the beep of the hose trucks. Over coffee, standing at the stove, I told Betsy what I had seen. "Am I imagining things because I'm frightened? But it wasn't like that. It was real. Oh, Betsy, was it a kind of vision?" Betsy's finger traced a pattern on the wooden sink worn smooth by generations of ten booms. I don't know, she said softly, but if God has shown us bad times ahead, it's enough for me that He knows about them. Highlight. That's why He sometimes shows us things, to tell us that this too is in His hands. Also highlight. For 5 days, Holland held out against the invader. We kept the shop open, not because anyone was interested in watches, but because people wanted to see Father. Some wanted him to pray for husbands and sons stationed at the borders of the country. Others, it seemed to me, came just to see him sitting there behind his workbench, as he had for 60 years, and to hear in the ticking clocks a world of order and reason. There's some good content in that paragraph. I won't point at any specific sentence. If you'd like to highlight that whole thing, if you'd like to choose your own sentence, you can pause this video, choose a really good sentence out of that. But as a reminder, as I give you great suggestions, please be highlighting your own content too, because for the most part, this book is up to you to highlight. It just so happens I'm giving you some freebies today and yesterday. So others, it seemed to me, came just to see him sitting there behind his workbench as he had for 60 years, and to hear in the ticking clocks a world of order and reason. Moving on. I never opened my workbench at all, but joined Betsy making coffee and carrying it down. We brought down the portable radio too, and set it up on the display case. Radio was Harlem's eyes and ears, and very pulse rate, for after that first night, although we often heard planes overhead, the bombing never came so close again. Highlight the importance of radio. That might be an important detail I ask you on a quiz. Hello. The first morning, over the radio came instructions that ground floor windows must be taped. Up and down the Bartel-Joris-Straat, shop owners were out on the sidewalk. There was an unaccustomed neighborhood feel as advice, rolls of adhesive, and tales of the night's terror passed from door to door. One store owner, an outspoken anti-Semite, was helping Weil of the Jewish Furrier put up boards where a pane of glass had shaken loose. The optician next door to us, a silent, withdrawn individual, came over and taped the top of our display window where Betsy and I could not reach. Interesting. So it sounds like people are kind of doing this for them. Is this something that they're consenting to? Debatable. A few nights later, the radio carried the news we dreaded. The Queen had left. So for those of you who were here last Thursday, at Kahoot, a free answer on there was that the Queen leaves Holland. Please highlight that. That's huge. Imagine if you are being bombed and your own queen says, I'm gonna head out. What? I had not cried the night of the invasion, but I cried now, for our country was lost. In the morning, the radio announced tanks advancing over the border. Oh man. Sorry. And suddenly, all of Harlem was in the streets. Even Father, whose daily stroll was as predictable as his own clock chimes, broke his routines to go walking at the unheard hour of 10 a.m. It was as though we wanted to face what was coming together. The whole city united, as though each would draw strength from each other Hollander. Let's highlight that last sentence. It shows the spirit that they take care of each other in the chapters to come. And so the three of us walked, jostled by the crowd, over the bridge on the Sparn, all the way to the great wild, cherry tree, whose blossoms each spring formed such a white glory that it was called the Bride of Harlem. Underline or highlight the Bride of Harlem. Harlem. A few faded petals clung now to the new-leafed branches, but most of the bride's flowers had fallen, forming a wilted carpet beneath us. A window down the street flew open. "We've surrendered!" The procession in the street stopped short. Each told his neighbor what we had all heard for ourselves. A boy of maybe 15 turned to us with tears rolling down his cheeks. "I would have fought. I wouldn't ever have given up." Father stooped down to pick up a small bruised petal from the brick pavement. Tenderly, he inserted it in his buttonhole. "That is good, my son," he told the youngster, "for Holland's battle has just begun." Highlight. But during the first months of occupation, life was not so very unbearable. The hardest thing to get used to was the German uniform everywhere. German trunks and tanks in the street, German spoken in the shops. Soldiers frequently visited our store, for they were getting good wages and watches were among the first things they bought. Toward us, they took a superior tone, as though we were not so quite bright children. But among themselves, as I listened to them excitedly discussing their purchases, they seemed like young men anywhere off on a holiday. Most of them selected women's watches for mothers and sweethearts back home. So it's cool that even though we know the Nazis were some of the most inhumane people in modern day history, Corey still saw some humanity in them, just being like, "Ooh, look at my new purchase. How fun. I'll send it to my girlfriend back at home in Germany." So she still sees the humanity even in these people, which I predict goes into the way that she eventually does forgive her own Nazi oppressors, as we talked about in our pre-studies. So hopefully not spoilers, don't make me run laps. Indeed, the shop never made so much money as during that first year of the war. With no new shipments coming in, people bought up everything we had in stock, even the Winkle doctors, the shop daughters, merchandise that had lain around so long it seemed part of the furniture. We even sold the green marble mantel clock with the twin brass cupids. Highlight Winkle doctors. The curfew, too, at first, was no hardship for us, since it was originally set 10 p.m., long after we were indoors in any case. What we did object to were the identity cards each citizen was issued. These small folders containing photograph and fingerprints had to be produced on demand. A soldier or a policeman, the Haarlem police were now under the direct control of the German commandment. Highlight that sentence. And this next one, might stop a citizen at any time and ask to see his card. It had to be carried in a pouch around his neck. We were issued ration cards too. Highlight that too. But at least that first year, the coupons represented food and merchandise actually available in the stores. Each week, the newspapers announced what the current coupons could be exchanged for. So that's what we said earlier, where they were finally arrested for having extra ration cards. How'd you get those? Who were you trying to feed? So you see that all playing in now. Just remember what we talked about. That was another thing it was hard to adjust to. Newspapers that no longer carried news. Long glowing reports of the successes of the German army on its various fronts. Eulogies of German leaders, denunciations of traitors and saboteurs, appeals for the unity of the Nordic peoples, but not news that we could trust. And so we depended again on the radio. Early in the occupation, Haarlemers were ordered to turn in all private sets. Realizing it would look strange if our household produced none at all, we decided to turn in the portable and hide the larger, more powerful instrument in one of the many hollow pages beneath the old, twisting staircase. Any information you want to highlight, I would do it now, because they do pretend like they're turning in a radio, but really they've got the better one at home. Both suggestions were Peter's. He was 16 at the time of the invasion and shared with other Dutch teenagers the restless energy of anger and impotence. Peter installed the table radio beneath a curve in the stairs just above Father's room and expertly replaced the old boards, while I carried the smaller one down to the big Vroom and Driesman department store, where the radio collection was being made. The army clerk looked at me across the counter. "Is this the only radio you own?" "Yes." He consulted a list in front of him. "Ten Boom, Casper. Ten Boom, Elizabeth. At the same address. Do either of them own a radio?" I had known from childhood that the earth opened up and the heavens rained fire upon liars, but I met his gaze. "No." I'd highlight that, because in a few chapters, maybe even starting in this one, the ethicality and the morality of lying is being challenged within Corey's mind. God says not to lie, but should I lie for the right cause? And we'll do a little activity on that in the coming weeks to follow of should we be lying if there's a good cause? What are your thoughts? So be thinking of that. Only as I walked out of the building did I begin to tremble, not because for the first time in my life I had told a conscious lie, but because it had been so dreadfully easy. But we had saved our radio. Every night, Betsy or I would remove the stair tread and crouch over the radio, the volume barely audible, while the other one thumped the radio in Tante Jans's room as hard as she could to hear the news from England. And at first, the news over the radio and the news in our captive press was much the same. The German offensive was everywhere victorious. Month after month, the Free Dutch broadcasts could only urge us to wait, to have courage, to believe in the counteroffensive, which must surely someday be mounted. Remember that was Hitler's Blitzkrieg. You know that was an offensive move that was very successful. And here we see from the perspective of people in real history, not just our textbooks, that it really was effective and really changed lives everywhere. The Germans have repaired the bomb damage to the airport and were using it now as a base for air raids against England. Night after night, we lay in bed listening to the growl of engines heading west. Occasionally, English planes retaliated, and then the German fighters might intercept them right over Haarlem. One night I tossed for an hour while dogfights raged overhead, streaking my patch of sky with fire. At last I heard Betsy stirring in the kitchen and ran down to join her. She was making tea. She brought it into the dining room, where we had covered the windows with heavy black paper and set out the best cups. Somewhere in the night there was an explosion. The dishes in the cupboard rattled. For an hour we sipped our tea and talked, until the sound of planes died away and the sky was silent. I said goodnight to Betsy at the door to Tante Jans's rooms, and groped my way up to the dark stairs to my own. Sorry, too many prepositions again. The fiery light was gone from the sky. I felt for my bed. There was the pillow. Then in the darkness my hand closed over something hard. Sharp, too. I felt blood trickle along a finger. It was a jagged piece of metal, 10 inches long. Highlight that. Betsy! I raced down the stairs with the shrapnel shard in my hand. We went back to the dining room and stared at it in the light while Betsy bandaged my hand. On your pillow, she kept saying. Betsy, if I hadn't heard you in the kitchen. But Betsy put a finger in my mouth. Don't say it, Corey. There are no ifs in God's world, and no places that are safer than other places. The center of His will is our only safety. Oh, Corey, let us pray that we may always know it. Highlight those bars of a paragraph. That's amazing. We will see the theme of faith and trust in God so prevalent in these chapters. And this is nonfiction. This is a true story. So you too can have this same faith and trust in the Lord in your circumstances. The true horror of occupation came over us only slowly. During the first year of German rule, there were only minor attacks on Jews in Holland. A rock through the window of a Jewish-owned store, and ugly words scrawled on the wall of a synagogue. You might want to highlight some of these sentences at your own choice. It was as though they were trying us, testing the temper of the country. How many Dutchmen would go along with them? And the answer, to our shame, was many. Highlight that. The Nationalist-Socialist Bond, the Quisling organization of Holland, grew larger and bolder with each month of occupation. Some joined the NSB simply for the benefits, more food, more clothing coupons, the best jobs and housing. But others became NSBers out of conviction. Nazism was a disease to which the Dutch, too, were susceptible, and those with an anti-Semitic bias fell sick of it first. I wouldn't even just highlight this. I'd put a big old star next to this one. The National Socialist Bond is what the Nazis are called, as a reminder from history. And you need to know that some joined it out of, pretty good benefits, pretty good pay. It's a good job, good corporate ladder climb. Others just already hated Jews. Lord help us, this was a disease, and it spread in the minds of the sinful heart. On our daily walk, Father and I saw the symptoms spread. A sign in a shop window, Jews will not be served. At the entrance to a public park, no Jews. On the door of the library, in front of restaurants, theaters, even the concert hall whose alley we knew so much better than its seats. Already we see legal discrimination. A synagogue burned down and the fire trucks came, but only to keep the flames from spreading to the buildings on either side. One noon, as Father and I followed our familiar route, the sidewalks were bright with yellow stars sewn to coats and jacket fronts. Men, women, and children wore the six-pointed star with the word Jude, parentheses, Jew. Highlight in the center. We were surprised as we walked at how many of the people we had passed each day were Jews. The man who read the world shipping news in the Grote Market wore a star on his neatly pressed business suit. So did the bulldog, his jowly face more deeply lined than ever. His voice as he fussed at his dogs, sharp with strain. Highlight that the bulldog is also a Jew. Worst were the disappearances. A watch repaired and ready, hanging on its hook in the back of the shop month after month. A house in Nolly's block mysteriously deserted. Grass growing in the rose garden. One day Mr. Kahn's shop up the street did not open. Father knocked on his door as we passed that noon to see if someone were ill, but there was no answer. The shop remained shuttered, the windows above dark and silent for several weeks. Then, although the shop stayed closed, an NSB family moved into the apartment above. We never knew whether these people had been spirited away by the Gestapo or gone into hiding before this could happen. Certainly public arrests, with no attempt to conceal what was happening, were becoming more frequent. Highlight those two sentences. One day, as Father and I were returning from our walk, we found the Grote Market cordoned off by a double ring of police and soldiers. A truck was parked in front of the fish mart. Into the back were climbing men, women, and children, all wearing the yellow star. Highlight that too if you want, but I feel like you already know it's happening. There was no reason we could see why this particular place at this particular time had been chosen. "Father, those people!" I cried. The police line opened. The truck moved through. We watched till it turned the corner. "Those poor people," Father echoed. But to my surprise, I saw that he was looking at the soldiers now, forming into ranks to march away. "I pity the poor Germans, Corey. They have touched the apple of God's eye." So see, he has the faith that, just like the Bible promises that don't touch Israel, you're going to get punished for it. He actually pities the Germans more for their lives, for their righteousness being gone. How will God judge them? So how merciful is Father to be saying that I pity the sinners more? That's the way Jesus looks at us, and it's beautiful. We don't deserve it. Here we are. We talked often, Father, Betsy, and I, about what we could do if a chance could come to help some of our Jewish friends. We knew that Willem had found hiding places at the beginning of the occupation for the German Jews who had been living in his house. Lately, he had also moved some of the younger Dutch Jews away from the nursing home. "Not my old people," he would say. "Surely they would not touch my old people." Willem had addresses. He knew of farms in rural areas where there were few occupying troops. Willem would be the one to ask. It was a drizzly November morning in 1941. A year and a half earlier after the invasion, as I stepped outside to fold back the shutters, that I saw a group of 4 German soldiers coming down to the Bartelierstraat. They were wearing combat helmets low over their ears, rifles strapped to their shoulders. I shrank back into the doorway and watched. They were checking shop numbers as they walked. At Weil's Furrier's, directly across the street, the group stopped. Highlight that. One of the soldiers unstrapped his gun and with the butt banged on the door. He was drawing it back for another blow when the door opened and all 4 pushed inside. I dashed back through our shop and up to the dining room where Betsy was setting out 3 places. "Betsy, hurry! Something awful is happening at it's happening at Weil's." We reached the front door again this time, to see Mr. Weil backing out of his shop, the muzzle of a gun pressed against his stomach. When he had prodded Mr. Weil a short way down the sidewalk, the soldier went back into the store and slammed the door. Not an arrest then. Inside, we could hear his glass breaking. Soldiers began carrying out armloads of furs. A crowd was gathering in spite of the early morning hour. Mr. Weil had not moved from the spot on the sidewalk where the soldier had left him. A window over his head opened, and a small shower of clothes rained down on him. Pajamas, shirts, underwear. Slowly, mechanically, the old furrier stooped and began to gather up his clothing. Betsy and I ran across the street to help him. "Your wife!" Betsy whispered urgently. "Where's Mrs. Weil?" The man only blinked at her. "You must come inside," I said, snatching socks and handkerchiefs from the sidewalk. "Quick, with us!" As we propelled the bewildered old man across to the Baye. Father was in the dining room, where we reached it and greeted Mr. Weil without the slightest bit of surprise. His natural manners seemed to relax the furrier a bit. His wife, he said, was visiting a sister in Amsterdam. "We must find a telephone and warn her not to come home," Betsy said. Like most private telephones, ours had been disconnected early in the occupation. There were public phones at several places in the city, but of course, messages were to a public reception center at the other end. Was it right to connect a family in Amsterdam with the trouble here? And if Mrs. Weil could not come home, where was she to go? Highlight those last 2 sentences. So, do we want to involve an innocent family in Amsterdam by letting the Germans know we're calling them? But we also need Mrs. Weil to know so she doesn't die or get arrested. It's dangerous. Where were the Weils to live? Certainly not with the sister where they could so easily be traced. Father and Betsy and I exchanged glances. Almost with a single breath, we said, "Willem." Again, it was not the kind of matter that could be relayed through the public phone system. Someone had to go, and I was the obvious choice. Dutch trains were dirty and overcrowded under the occupation. The trip that should have taken under an hour took nearly 3. Willem was not there when I finally reached the big nursing home just after noon, but Tyne and their 22-year-old son Kik were. Highlight those 2 names, Tyne and 22-year-old son Kik. Kik is a nephew who is older, but he will be taking a lot of initiative and helping out with our mission. I told them what had happened on the Bartelierstraat and gave them the Amsterdam address. "Tell Mrs. Weil to be ready as soon as it's dark," Kik said. But it was nearly 9 p.m., the new curfew hour, before Kik rapped at the alley door, tucking Mr. Weil's clothing bundle beneath his arm. He led the man away into the night. It was more than 2 weeks before I saw Kik again, to ask him what had happened. He smiled at me, the broad, slow smile I had loved since he was a child. Highlight that just for characterization. "If you're going to work with the underground, Tante Corey, you must learn not to ask questions." That was all we ever learned of the Weils. But Kik's words went round and round in my head. The underground? If you're going to work with the underground. Was Kik working with this secret and illegal group? Was Willem? Highlight those 2 questions. We knew, of course, that there was an underground in Holland, or suspected it. Most cases of sabotage were not reported in our controlled press, but rumors abounded. A factory had been blown up, a train carrying political prisoners had been stopped, and 7 or 17 or 70 had made it away. The rumors tended to get more spectacular with each repetition, but always they featured things we believed were wrong in the sight of God. Stealing, lying, murder. Was this what God wanted in times like these? How should a Christian act when evil was in power? Question. Let's highlight that question. It was about a month after the raid on the fur shop that Father and I, on our usual walk, saw something so very unusual that we both stopped in mid-stride. Walking towards us along the sidewalk, as so many hundreds of times before, came the bulldog with his rolling, short-legged gait. The bright yellow star had by now ceased to look extraordinary. So what? And then I knew what was wrong. The dogs. The dogs were not with him. Sad for all you dog lovers. He passed without seeming to see us. With one accord, Father and I turned around and walked after him. He turned a number of corners, while we grew more and more embarrassed at following him without any real excuse. Although Father and he had tipped their hats to each other for years, we had never spoken and did not even know his name. At last the man stopped in front of a small second-hand shop, took out a ring of keys, and let himself in. We looked through the window at the cluttered interior. Only a glance showed us that this was more than the usual hodgepodge of bric-a-brac and hollow-seated chairs. Someone who loved beautiful things had chosen everything here. "We must bring Betsy," I said. A little bell over the door jingled as we stepped in. Astonishing to see the bulldog hatless and indoors, unlocking a cash drawer at the rear of the store. "Permit an introduction, sir," Father began. "I am Caspar Tenboom, and this is my daughter, Cornelia." The bulldog shook hands, and again I noticed the deep creases in the sagging cheeks. "Harry de Vries," he said. "Mr. de Vries, we've so often admired your, affection for your bulldogs. We hope they are well?" The squat little man stared from one side of us to the other. Slowly the heavy-rimmed eyes filled with tears. "Are they well?" he repeated. "I believe they are well. I hope that they are well. They are dead." "Dead," we said together. Please just highlight that this is what's happening. I'm sorry that you have to think of the dogs dying, but this really happened. "I put the medicine in their bowl with my own hands, and I petted them to sleep. My babies. My little ones. If you could only have seen them eat. I waited, you know, till we had enough coupons for meat. They used to have meat all the time." We stared at him dumbly. "Was it," I ventured at last, "was it because of the rationing?" With a gesture of his hands, the little man invited us into a small room in back of the shop and gave us chairs. "Miss Tenboom, I am a Jew. Who knows when they will come to take me away? My wife, too, although she is a Gentile, is in danger because of her marriage." The bulldog raised his chin so high his jowls stretched taut. I love how we're still calling him a bulldog. Like, we know his name now. "It is not for ourselves we mind. We are Christians, Cato and I. When we die, we will see Jesus, and this is all that matters." But I said to Cato, "What about the dogs? If we are taken away, who will feed them? Who will remember their water and their walk? They will wait, and we will not come, and they will not understand. No, this way my mind is at ease." "My dear friend," Father grasped the bulldog's hand in both of his, "now that these dear companions may no longer walk with you, will you not do my daughter and me the great honor of accompanying us?" But this the bulldog would not do. "It would put you in danger," he kept saying. He did, however, accept an invitation to come to visit us. After dark," he said. And so one evening, the following week, Mr. de Vries came to the alley door of the Bayet, bringing his sweet, shy wife too, Cato. It's funny how the bulldog is married to Cat-O. Sorry, that's where my brain is going. And soon she and Harry were almost nightly visitors in Tante Jan's front room. The Bulldog Chief's delight at the Bayet, after talking with Father, were the tomes of Jewish theology now housed in Tante Jan's big mahogany case. For she had become a Christian some 40 years earlier, without ceasing in the least to be a loyal Jew. A completed Jew, he would tell us smilingly, a follower of the one perfect Jew. Maybe highlight that. That's a very nice thing to say. The books belonged to the Rabbi of Harlem. He had brought them to Father more than a year before, just in case I should not be able to care for them. Indefinitely. He had waved a bit apologetically at the procession of small boys behind them, each staggering under the weight of several huge volumes. My little hobby, book collecting. And yet, old friend, books do not age as you and I do. They will speak still when we are gone, to generations we will never see. Yes, the books must survive. Highlight that. Books are very important. They are timeless. The rabbi had been one of the first to vanish from Harlem. Highlight that. If the leader of the Jews, in a sense, in a town, if their spiritual leader is gone first, that's quite symbolic of what kind of message they were trying to make. How often it is a small, almost unconscious event that marks a turning point. As arrests of Jews in the street became more frequent, I had begun picking up and delivering work for our Jewish customers myself, so that they would not have to venture into the center of town. And so one evening in the early spring of 1942, I was in the home of a doctor and his wife. They were a very old Dutch family. The portraits on the walls could have been a textbook of Holland's history. The Heemstras, highlight that name, the Heemstras and I were talking about the things that were discussed whenever a group of people got together in those days. Rationing and the news from England, when down the stairs piped a childish voice, "Daddy, you didn't tuck us in." Dr. Heemstra was on his feet in an instant. With an apology to his wife and me, he hurried upstairs, and in a minute we heard a game of hide-and-seek going and the shrill laughter of two children. That was all. Nothing had changed. Mrs. Heemstra continued with her recipe for stretching the tea ration with rose leaves. And yet everything had changed. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was changed. For in that instant, reality broke through the numbness that had grown in me since the invasion. At any minute, there might be a rap on this door. These children, this mother and father, might be ordered to the back of a truck. Dr. Heemstra came back to the living room, and the conversation rambled on. But under the words, a prayer was forming in my heart. Dear Lord Jesus, I offer myself for your people, in any way, any place, any time. And then an extraordinary thing happened. Even as I prayed, that waking dream passed again before my eyes. I saw again those 4 black horses and the Grote Market. As I had on the night of the invasion, I scanned the passengers drawn so unwillingly behind them. Father, Betsy, Willem, myself, leaving Harlem, leaving all that was sure and safe. Going where? Thank y'all for, I don't know how long this video is going to end up being, but I hope I didn't take too much time out of your day. Thank you for reading with me. Add any extra highlights you would like to your own books. And if you didn't bring your book home, please, I hope that you were taking notes in like a journal or a lined paper to add later. You can hopefully copy off of a friend in school tomorrow, if we're at school tomorrow or later this week. And pray for my family. My mom is sick. I have that weird cough still. So just pray for all that, and hope you all have a safe, non-slippery, icy day. Goodbye.